everybody. So a long-ish time ago, I was 14 years old. And it's a summer day. It's beautiful Southern California, and I should be the happiest kid in the world because in the distance is my beautiful Disney, below me is my beloved Starbucks, and behind me a couple miles is the beach. It's perfect, and I'm staring out this third floor window, but I'm not happy. Because on the right side of me, my doctor is diagnosing me with hypoglycemia. And he's explaining this is why you've been depressed and sick recently, and that you are at an extreme risk for long-term health problems. And so on this beautiful Southern California day, immediately I deny it. I say, no, that's not true, that's not me, that's not what's wrong with me, that's not true. And I'm my own little microcosm of science denial here. And something important is going to happen right now, is that my doctor has been an amazing scientist. For the entire summer, we've been going to different doctors, and nobody's been able to figure out what's wrong with me. But my doctor, he got the facts right. He got the facts right. But he's looking at me, this 14-year-old stubborn nerd who's denying him, and he knows that the facts aren't enough. The fact that he is right is not enough to make me healthy, because the only way I'm going to be healthy is if I change my behavior. And so he has to figure out and overcome my denial. And the question is, why am I denying this? And on one hand, maybe I'm denying this because I'm scared of being sick when I'm 40 years old. I'm 14, I don't care. I hadn't thought of my life past 25. The reason that I was denying this fact, though absolutely stupid, was because I knew the solution. And that solution was, I couldn't go get a caramel frappuccino at Starbucks after it was over. That's it. I did not have a lot going on for me at 14. I had pretty much caramel frappuccinos, and if he took Harry Potter away, if he said you can't get well unless you stop reading Harry Potter, he would have taken everything away from me. And this sounds absolutely ridiculous, right? But for a 14-year-old, this is awesome, right? First of all, it's delicious. It still is, by the way. But it was my place where I would be cool. I was this little nerd and was the only place I could go and be cool. And so my doctor ended up convincing me that I had hypoglycemia, but not because he was this great deliverer just of facts, but because he understood the reason I was denying it. And that's what I was because I was engaging in something my colleague Aaron Kay and I have done a lot of tests on and call solution aversion, which is denying a problem, not necessarily because you are scared of the aspects of the problem themselves, but you are scared of the solutions to the problem. You can deny the fact that you're hypoglycemic because you're afraid of the problem of being unhealthy in the future, but you can also deny because you want to have a caramel frappuccino. You can deny climate change because you're scared that the world's going to burn up, or you can deny climate change maybe because of your motivation is because that annoying environmentalist over there wants you to compost, or that government wants you to change the policy in your local town and put some more regulation in it. And so my doctor, in some ways, legitimately saved my life in getting me to understand that I had a problem, because he immediately understood my solution aversion. And he talked to me about how I would go on a diet where I'd have lots of yummy foods, including things like steak, which I liked at that time and still do. And he was able to make me realize that solving the problem was not going to be the worst thing. And if I ate correctly, and if I did things right, I could go to Starbucks now and again, as long as I managed it. And so my doctor, on one hand, was an amazing scientist. He got the facts right. But on the other hand, he was an amazing psychologist. And that's what I want to talk about today, is not just getting the facts right, but getting the psychology right, so the facts that we do find will actually change the world. Because being right is not enough. We also have to be psychologically right. So, Dr. Manuel Fernandez is my hero, and sort of has, in a weird way, sort of inspired and as I sort of understood how important he was in my life, has inspired a lot of my research projects. So I'm going to have a lot of these things up here today, which is we think that, or we do that, or we tend to, but actually. So we think that we need to get the facts right, when actually we also need to get the psychology right. And I also want to point out that this is going to be insanely complicated. There's going to be so many factors at play, and that this lecture is not going to be a wonderful everything fits together. It's going to be an armada of different techniques and just a slew of different problems we have to deal with, such that there is not going to be a model for how we deal with problems in modern time. It's going to be a collection of insights from individual studies and individual researchers, whether that's a psychologist, journalist, an evolutionary biologist, whatever it is, they're all going to have insights that we somehow need to understand together and develop an actual wisdom rather than trying to model everything. So, also adding the things we think people deny problems because of the problem's quality, when actually often people deny because of solutions. And this solution aversion project, Obama's regulatory czar, Cass Sunstein, he's also the guy that wrote the Nudge book that just won the Nobel Prize with Richard Thaler, has talked about how he thinks solution aversion is one of the most overlooked things in modern policy. And so that idea, as well as some of the other ideas today, hopefully, if we don't overlook them, we can make some differences. Alrighty, so that's a heavy start. Let's just ask a simple question. Who is a sports fan here? Who's a sports fan? Hands up in the air. All right, so who's a fan? Who's a fan of the Dodgers? I'm sorry, that was just too easy. That was just too easy. Is anybody a fan of the Astros? Nope. Good. West Coast. All right. So what's a team we're a fan of? Do we have any Angels fans? I'm from Southern California. Yeah, Angels fans. Cool. Do we have any Duck fans? Yeah, obviously. Seahawks fans? Lakers fans? Not so much. Warriors fans? Cool, cool, cool. Yeah, awesome. All right, so if you are a sports fan, you're going to understand this next part very, very simply. And if you're not a sports fan, you've probably been to a sports game with one of these people here, and you're going to understand this part very, very clearly. And so what we're going to talk about are lies. We're going to start by talking about it from the angle of sports. Because all of us who are sports fans, when we walk into stadiums, become huge, massive liars together, right? Right? So any call that is against our team, whether it's fair or not, is the wrong call if it's against our team. How many times have you shouted, "That's a foul, ref," when the guy maybe grazed his arm shooting a three-pointer? That's how we act at sporting events. And the thing about this is, that's interesting about this from a psychological perspective, is we also really enjoy lying together, right? Nodding. It's a bonding experience to go out there and shout with your friends, "Hey, that's a foul," when it's not a foul. That's actually more bonding sometimes than when you're actually calling out the right thing. And the interesting thing, a part of it is if we're all shouting, say we're at a Ducks game and we're shouting, "That's a penalty," when it's not a penalty. Throw a flag, ref, when the ref shouldn't have thrown a flag. And we look at someone next to us in the student or non-student section, and they're sitting there and they're like, "I think it's a good call." We do not turn to that person and say, "Look at you, you amazing example of logic and reason." No, we say, "Hey, I think there's something wrong with him. I don't think he supports the team. I don't think he's actually a Duck fan. He's wearing a shirt. I'm not sure if he's a Duck fan," right? And so what's happening here is that people are saying things that are untrue, and we know that they are untrue, and yet we are actually rewarding them for doing that. These lies aren't deceiving anybody, but they're signaling something. And I mean, this is all over the place. So this is, your guys' front row is going to see this. If you walk in to a university store, what do you think you should see when you walk into a university store? Right? There's a place that studies truth and reason. You should see books about logic and empirical facts. Right now, when you walk into the UO store on 13th, you see in the very, very front a shirt that says, Autzen Stadium, no rain in 50 years, right? You walk into the university store and you see an empirical, bold-faced lie, right? Now, does it rain much at Autzen? No. And I think potentially almost like statistically it is a little bit sort of rarer than it should be. But the fact is, I've been at Autzen when it rains at Autzen. But imagine you were talking to two different people, and those two different people are one person who says, yeah, it rains at Autzen, maybe like 1 out of every 8, 1 out of every 10 games, and they give a close to the truth. And another person here says, never rains at Autzen. Who do you like more? If you had maybe an extra beer, who'd you give it to? If you had a shirt for the university, who'd you give it to? If you're going to hire somebody for the fan section, who would you give it to? If you're going to vote for somebody for city council, who would you give it to? Who would you give your vote to? You might give your vote to the liar, because lies are signals. And this is something that us here in the university, I think, often forget, at least at a conscious level. Because when we think of the truth, we are so focused on the truth as this special, super quality that needs to be valued. And I agree with that. That should be true. But we don't sort of see how it's operationalizing in life. So we think lies only work when they deceive, but when actually they work simply when they signal, right? There used to be a sign outside on 13th Street at a burrito stand, and it used to have at the top, probably a bold-faced lie, burritos make you smart. And I wanted to wear that on a t-shirt, right? I wanted to wear it on a t-shirt because A, I love burritos. They're amazing. And B, I'm from Southern California where I ate burritos all the time, and all those health nuts on Newport Beach would tell me not to. And if I wore that shirt, what that shirt would signal is that I'm willing to wear a lie because I want to signal to you Newporties that your standards of health and beauty and exercise and superficialism do not apply to me, right? When certain politicians lie about things like this news station said something when that news station didn't say anything, what they are doing is signaling that that news station's view of them is not relevant to them. So there's so much that's going on when we state factual inaccuracies than just being inaccurate or trying to deceive. So what we find in some research on this is that people will, as I've given some examples, intuitive examples, is people will sometimes prefer a liar that lies, that signals that they are on their team. This is especially true when situations are ambiguous and you have some reason to believe that the person may not be really committed to your team. There's also something that we find in studies is that people will often say that they believe in a fact, but that they would potentially dislike someone who would state that fact publicly. So you might believe in a scientific fact based upon like biological differences between two groups that you would know has scientifically been shown. But if you heard anyone say that in public, you would think that that person was racist, sexist, or whatever groups it applied to. And so people actually often dislike truth tellers, or at least are skeptical of truth tellers, even when they believe the thing that the person is saying to them, because they think to themselves, what type of person would admit that? That kind of seems to suggest this other thing. And so we actually repress the truths we say, and we actually knock down people who we know sometimes are saying the truth. So, what is sort of the takeaway from all of this, and how can we use this to get into sort of the main part of what we're talking about today? What the lie examples really show is that what we often really care about is somebody on our team? Is somebody looking out for us? And this is something that is very, very worrisome on most people's minds. People are worried, is somebody on their team? Is somebody really caring about me? And it's something that is very much often missing in both journalism and activism. So I'm not going to say whether those things should be there or they should not be there, but I'm going to say that they are not there often and that their absence often make things less convincing to people. So I'm not going to be prescriptive in saying, hey, journalists, I'm not going to walk in here and be an activist and business researcher and say, hey, here's exactly what you should do. But I'm going to come here and say, hey, here is something that you should think about that I think is often overlooked in the way that journalistic pieces and activist pieces or PR pieces are often interpreted. And that is, we often think when we want to go up to talk to somebody who we disagree with, we go up to that person and we say, hey, let's have a rational conversation, right? Because, what's your name?
Spencer.
Hey, Spencer. So because what Spencer hears when I say, let's have a rational conversation, what he hears is, oh, here's a guy who's going to tell me why I'm wrong and why I'm stupid and why I need to change my behavior and why I am hurting everything that he considers important. What we often should do is not say when we go to talk to people or try and communicate with people, let's have a rational conversation. What we should start with is, Spencer, I like you. You seem pretty cool. And I just want to say that I think sometimes I've heard your opinions about this color of green. And I think people have, been mean to you based upon the fact that you're wearing that color green. And I think people have sort of misunderstood you, and I think that there are prejudices against you. And I just want you to know at the end of this conversation, I want to talk about some of the things that I care about, but I care about you, and I want you to be better off. I want every one of us to be better off. I'm not just coming to you with my problems. I know you have problems. I want you to be better. And so we call this the start with care principle. So that when you're communicating with people, you don't start just with rationality, you don't start with facts, you don't start just with logic, you start with care. And very few journalistic pieces often seem like they have an explicit piece of care in them, right? It's usually just the facts and whatnot. And so people are reading these articles and they're thinking, oh, does this person care about me? Is this person just trying to use facts to advance agenda that is going to be in opposite of what would be good for me and my group? So we think that we just need to have a rational conversation, when in actuality we need to have a caring one. So when we're trying to convince people whether we are the expert ourselves or whether we're the journalist covering expertise, we often sort of engage in this kind of thing. The bullhorn shout the truth model, right? We say, let's just come up here and present the facts, present the criticisms. And that's how we approach things. And we believe that in order to build trust in this message, we need to emphasize that we are experts, right? We think, in order to get somebody to believe it, we need to explain why we are experts. We need to explain that these are smart scientists from smart universities, and they use smart methods, and they have huge sample sizes. These are smart, careful researchers, right? And that's one idea that we think we should build trust. And here's the problem. This is Bill Nye in the 90s. Look at this guy. Who wants to have a beer with that guy, right? Everybody, right? This guy looks nice. This guy looks fun. This guy's making mistakes on his show. He's dopey. He's approachable. And you know what? He seems like he cares about me. Even if I sort of disagree, even if I'm not sort of familiar with science, I feel like this guy is cool. He cares about me. He wants to sit down, look me into the eye, have a conversation like Spencer and I were going to have. This is Bill Nye in 2017 on the Netflix ad, literally looking down on you. Literally looking down on you. Now I look at this and I'm like, yeah, I want to watch this show. I'm a researcher at a good research university. I want to look down on the people who don't understand science. I like that. Like, I get excited by that, right? This is choir speak for me. This is a great UO Duck football ad for me. This is awesome. But for anybody who feels that scientists might not like them, or might be criticizing them, or might be talking about a policy that might seem to be against their ideology, this is very off-putting. And the thing about it is, when we think of science and we think of expertise, we often just focus on that expertise. But what we end up often being like is we end up often being like that car mechanic that we all know about, who we are 100% sure is brilliant. We've seen him fix a Maserati in his car garage. I don't know. I've never been to a place that fixed Maserati, so I've seen him fix a really high quality Toyota Camry in his garage, right? I know that he's skilled, but I'm worried that he doesn't have my best interest. He is skilled, but I'm worried he doesn't care about me. He's going to overcharge me. And that's how I think a lot of people look at scientists. They look at them as capable, amoral, or even immoral, or at least on other teams not caring about you. And so in order to build trust, you need to do two things. You need to show that you have the ability and the expertise, but you also need to demonstrate that you have care. So how do you demonstrate that you have care? There's millions and millions of different ways to do that. We're doing research on some of these. Acknowledging other people's needs is a good way to do it. Fix something for them. Take some advice from Kendrick Lamar and be humble. Admit your group is at fault. Ask for input. Be friendly. Develop an external enemy. And always remember, if you treat somebody like the enemy, they will truly become your enemy. Right? So when I'm talking with Spencer, I'm going to start off by thinking about, tell me about how you think people are prejudiced against the color green. Right? Tell me how people are prejudiced and that you feel bad about how people are mean to the Marines sometimes. Tell me that. And even if that's potentially not what we're talking about, we're not talking anything about military or Marines or something, it still is addressing the fact that I care about his outcome. And the other thing about this is a line here from Mark Leary, a really, really great social psychologist from Duke University. He says, being ignored is almost the same thing as being disliked. So lots of times what we say when we're writing these pieces is we're not ignoring you, we're not disliking you, we're just talking about something else. But if you go, say you are this is going to get touchy, but say you are a rural, white, evangelical Christian, and then you go to the New York Times and every single article is about people who are in no way like you, that makes you seem like the New York Times does not like you because they're choosing not to write you. All of us here probably, we're at a university now, we were a little nerdy in high school. I doubt more than 5% of you were the popular kids in school. I definitely was not in high school. And I didn't hate, you didn't hate the popular kids just because they were mean to you. Lots of them weren't mean to you. You hated the popular kids because they didn't care about you. They didn't even know that you exist. They never acknowledged you, right? And that's how lots of people feel about experts, scientists, journalists, that they do not care about them. So lots of times when I do this as a very long thing, I have a longer section on care, but not today. So I'm going to immediately jump into a criticism of what I just said, which is that potentially care is not enough. So care is lovely. A doctor can go up to you and seem like, I really care about your health. Really want you to get in health. But that doctor doesn't seem like he likes me, right? He cares about me. He even maybe loves me in some proverbial sense, but he doesn't seem to really like who I am. He's just like my Newport friends, Troy, I think you need to lose another 10 pounds to be good looking enough or be healthy enough, right? He doesn't seem to be liking who I am. And to some degree, this is what happened to the problem with Hillary Clinton, is that Hillary Clinton seemed, so not saying if she was or not, but she seemed to many people that she was out there and she's saying, I want to give you health care, but also I believe you're deplorable. Maybe not you, but your friends, at least half of them are in a basket of deplorables. And that's how the narrative came around Hillary, is that she's somebody who sort of cares about you, but doesn't really believe or like who you are. And so this is Mike Krzyzewski, Coach K. Love him or hate him, he's a great coach. And one of the reasons he's a great coach is because he not only cares for his players, he does something beyond that, which he calls the I believe in you principle. And so Coach K says that the words I love you are talked about a lot, and I care for you is talked about a lot. But he says that these 4 words are potentially more powerful. Because when I say I love you to Jeff right here, I care for you, he, as a PhD student, is thinking, oh, he cares about, me being successful and stuff. But maybe he thinks, well, he wants me to do research just like him. He has a really idea of what it means. But when I go up to him and I say, Jeff, I believe in you, it means that I really like Jeff, that I really like what he's interested in, that if he's going to go a different way, that who he is right now is someone who I value and believe in. One of my favorite TV shows says this a different way. This is Ben and Leslie from Parks and Recreation, right? So adorable. They say, I love you and I like you, to sort of get those 2 concepts, right? I love you and I like you. Almost the idea behind this quote a little bit is like the mocking of normal couples on television, which is that they seem to love each other, but like on Everybody Loves Raymond or any other show like that, they don't seem to like each other. And this is often seemingly what scientists do, or journalists. I love everybody. I want everybody to be happy, but I don't really like who they are. Really what I want them to be is just like me. And on this, continuing on this ramble before we transition into some other stuff, is that, a lot of our relationships with academics, with journalists, are really, really positive, right? Some of you are actual journalists who have actual things and actual newspapers and blogs and YouTube channels, and your relationship with journalists has been very good. In part, you're a journalist now, right? And all of us, our relationship with academia, for the most part, comparatively to others, is amazing, right? In high school, most of you, or at least now in college, most of you are getting continuous reinforcement that you are good, right? You get A's from teachers when you were in high school. You were told, and now by being at this university, you are told you are good, academia likes you. Most people's relationship with science and teachers is not that good. Most people get C's or lower. So most people who grow up looking at the authority of knowledge and education in modern times are people who are saying, hey, I like Spencer and Jeff more than I like you, right? For 12 years, from 1st to 12th grade, people are continually getting told by academics, and then potentially into college to some degree, we do not think you are as good as these other people are. And oftentimes teachers don't come out and say, okay, so I actually try and do this a lot in my class, which is I'm like, okay, you're a C or a lower B student, but you have this other value and keep killing it at that. No, it's you're a C student, this person got every question right on the multiple choice test, which is somewhat of an arbitrary test, and I think that that person is amazing. And so the relationship and the way that we feel, or the way that most people potentially feel about academics and other sources of authority is very negative. So we think we should just show care for others, but we need to show belief in others. We think we need to just love others when actually we need to also like others. We got a good time. I wanted to talk about now 2 other things. And again, I'm trying to give a talk that really represents how I view the world. There are a million different things going on, and I cannot present to you a model of what's going on fully, but I can show you a lot of different things to think about, and hopefully in your situations with your wisdom, you'll be able to do that right. So there's 2 types of people in this world that you're going to be communicating with at a broad level, and they're going to be called your choir and the skeptical. The choir are people who tend to already agree with you. They're a person who's reading an article about racial justice because they're really, really interested in finding out how they can do more. They're the person who's reading your article about climate change, and they're trying to figure out, how can I learn to do more? But the skeptical are the people who are skeptical of you for whatever reasons, a lot of them that we've been talking about so far. And so the thing is, there's a lot of things that you can say to the choir that are going to be much more effective talking to the choir than the skeptical. And one of the things is you can only guilt the choir. It's very, very difficult to guilt the outside. And the choir is motivated by how far they have to go, and the skeptical are motivated by how far they have come. So it is very, very disheartening for someone to look out into the world and see something like this. Oh, here's environmentalism. Oh, so apparently in order to be good, I need to be a tree hugger and go to like this really, liberal, environmentally sound university, and I'm just an average Joe. Or I need to, Europe's killing it at being environmental and America is not. And I have a lot of friends on Facebook who love posting things like this. Hey, National Geographic just posted the 20 most green big cities in the world. Guess which country doesn't have one on those lists? Hint, take a look outside, right? And they get excited about that, right? Because it's part of their ideology, it's part of their intergroup identity politics. But then it just makes people down here feel more and more worse. And nobody wants to play a game they are worst at. Just nobody wants to play that, right? Especially a moral game. So if you are bad at soccer, you don't play soccer often, and you also say soccer is stupid. You're like, offsides is stupid. Stoppage time is stupid, and you find factual reasons. So when we make people feel bad at things, it doesn't convince them. It pushes them away. Now, for all of us who might be aboard a cause, guilting us really works, right? You can come up to me and you can tell me, like, Troy, do you have tickets for Coco yet? The new Pixar movie? You better. I'm like, oh no, I don't. I better get on that, right? You can come up to me and say, Troy, have you started composting yet? And I'm like, no, I got to do that. But you come up to a person who barely recycles and you tell them to compost, they've got one finger for you and it's between this one and this one, right? So what we need to do is we need to work on more welcoming things, and we also, and as much as we can, we need to avoid this Globo Gym thing. Here at Globo Gym, we're better than you, and we know it. And so we think we need one persuasive messages, but we need many types. And here's the killer point of this, and I think you guys already got it, but the messages that resonate with most of Americans are not the messages that resonate with you. If it's a cause you care about that cause more than probably 95% of Americans. And the thing that would motivate you is not motivating others. So when you design a message, it's very hard for you to design a message that's actually motivating for the majority of Americans. You also don't, when you write something, you aren't also sort of sensitive to all the ways that it's off-putting to people. Right? The other thing is we think we need to demand change when we actually need to welcome change. And we really need to sort of stop, and academia really buys into this. We talk about sort of bubbles and things like that. A phrase that doesn't get used enough, and I think actually really explains it best, is that what we are trying to be right now in modern times is enlightened loners. Right? We're really enlightened loners. Like, we're all in these rooms talking about who can be the most woke. Right? I'm so woke. And we have this sort of ideological purity, and we care. It's so egocentric. Right? You're like, you didn't read Coates' newest article yet? You're not woke. Get out of here. I'm better than you, right? That's sort of the way that these social justice communities can work. And I'll critique those very hard because I really, really care about those issues. So when I'm critiquing them, I'm critiquing my own crew. And yeah. So how much time do we have?
10 minutes or so.
Okay.
Questions?
Cool. Which one do we want to go to? Politicians are rock stars. No, let's not do that. Flight from facts. Those are things. Let's do these two then. Wow, I have a lot of slides. Okay. So I'm going to tell a story that's going to make me look bad, and then I'm going to tell a general important story. And if it burns some questions, maybe I do. All right. I want to tell you the tale of Diet Coke, and this is how I became a green person. And so I love doing this because I love going to green conferences where everybody's like, so, proper and stuff, and they're like, I was inspired by a book that I read when I was 10 years old, and that's how I became a very green activist. I was composting by the time I was 12 years old. And I go up on stage and I say, all right, guys, everybody's been telling some really inspirational stories. I want to tell you guys how I became green. I met a really hot British girl with a really, really hot accent, and she was green, and it made me want to be green, period. She came over to my apartment, and I gave her a Diet Coke, because I was balling at that time, and that's what I could afford, and she drinks the Diet Coke, and she utters a word that no one had ever uttered in my entire apartment ever. Where's the recycling, Troy? And I was like, oh no. And I didn't have one, but luckily I had a cardboard box which had a bunch of notes in it. So I went into the kitchen, pulled out Diet Cokes from my trash can, pulled that box over, put them in, handed it to her and said, actually I don't have a trash can because on that triangle thing, it's reuse before recycle. All right? Yeah, lying. But the point is, I ended up becoming green in part because I wanted to be green for somebody who liked me and who I really respected and liked. And that's a very important sort of takeaway from how we think about these things. So let's go to we think the facts will compel, they will not compel. Okay, so I want to end by talking about confirmation bias, because most of the time today I've been talking about sort of people denying things because they want to deny them. And this kind of feels good sometimes for us because it's just like, oh yeah, we're not denying things because we want to. Maybe we have some problems with identity politics in our groups, but it's good and whatnot. I want to talk about confirmation bias because this is a word from my field of psychology that has entered into common vocabulary, and just like the term fake news, has become incredibly messy and jumbled, and nobody really understands what it is, and they use it for everything. We need to be a little bit more precise about it. So let's talk about confirmation bias. So let me ask you guys a question. Are you happy with your social life? You don't have to answer, because some of you would probably say no, and then it would be sad. Are you happy with your social life? Think about that. This is how an experiment started where they gave half of the participants this question. In another experiment, they gave half of the participants this question. Are you unhappy with your social life? And then what they did is they gave them this question. How satisfied are you with your social life? And what happened is they found that these people gave a more positive answer to this question than these people over here. Alrighty? Because this started a confirmation bias. It started people to say, they started searching their brain for positive things. And if we search our brain for positive things, we can find positive things. If we search our brain for negative things, we can find negative things. And so confirmation bias isn't only this thing about us wanting to believe the world is the way it is. It's much bigger than that. And so confirmation bias sort of has two forms. So let's look at those two forms. One form is the one that we talk about all the time, like Democrats and Republicans, they want to believe what they want to believe. A couple of researchers recently argued that we should, and did some really nice tests to show the difference between normal confirmation bias and what they call desirability bias. And I would really like people to stop using the word confirmation bias to describe times where people are believing things because they want to believe it, because it hides a generic confirmation bias, which is going to be the last thing that we're going to talk about. So the hidden confirmation biases in our lives and societies. So we talked about that on a survey. A simple question can lead people. Juries tend to make up their mind early. They tend to make up their mind early such that the facts that are at the start are more likely to be influential than facts are at the end. This also works with social, we're running out of time. So let me just tell you like a very intuitive example of this, which is, this is Peter Ditto. He is awesome. He's a professor. He's a psychologist. His initials are literally PhD. How cool is that? This man was my high school best friend's father. And he told me when I was 14 and drinking Starbucks Frappuccinos that he was a psychologist. And I did not know what a psychologist was other than somebody who was a therapist. So in my mind, he was a therapist. And I looked at him and it was like, he kind of looks like a therapist. He looks nice, a little bald. It kind of looks like an academic. And I then took many, many classes and discovered that psychology was so much more. It's about politics. It's about designing Disney. It's about all these different things that happen. But you know what? I didn't update my belief on who Peter Ditto was. I looked at him and my initial thing was he's a therapist. Even though I learned tons new information, I didn't learn. I only found out that Peter Ditto was a social psychologist and nothing like a therapist psychologist when I went to sign up for social psychology at UC Irvine as an undergraduate and found out he was teaching that class. Right? And so this is my example with Peter Ditto, but put any sort of bias. Put a bias against a journalism school, a business school. Put it against a gender. Put it against a location. Put it against a race. Put it against a group. That's how those things can happen all the time. And they're not out of like a desire a lot to maintain that belief. It's just how the brain works. And the internet is making this worse. The confirmation bias works most when we're not thinking, and when you get reinforcement for posting things, so people will like things that make sense. And it also is problematic in testing, right? So say you believe something, you will Google it in a way often that will elicit that result, right? So you're thinking like, why are Democrats better than Republicans? Is going to give you different results on Google than why are Republicans better than Democrats. And so whatever thing you're feeling, just the way that you ask the question into search results, whether that's into Google or your brain, will elicit things that confirm that. So let's end with this little bit. So how do we fix this problem? And one of the things I think the best examples when you're trying to fix a problem is not always just to think of an answer, but look at where the answers are actually happening already. And so I want to talk about one really great bright spot that's happening right now. And that bright spot is Adam Ruins Everything, a YouTube channel. How many people have seen Adam's Ruins Everything? Right? So Adam's Ruins Everything is a YouTube series and now a show on True TV where Adam explains why what you might think is potentially wrong. Why you're wrong to think this thing about wine, or this thing about medicine, or this thing about hydration, or this thing about politics. And what's really nice about Adam's thing is it does something really special. And one of the things it does that's really special is it focuses on your thinking. So rather than going up, sorry Spencer, keep picking on you, rather than going to Spencer and saying, you're wrong, this is what's right, or this is what's right, I go up to Spencer, and this is how Adam does it on the show, and he says, here's why it's perfectly logical and reasonable that you think this, but here is why that is wrong, and let me show how your psychology was tricked in a way that you shouldn't feel bad about. It just is the way it is. And so it's this really great way to fight against confirmation bias, because when you try and fight against a belief somebody have, you can't go up to them and be like, you're wrong, here's the facts. It's much better to go up to them to say, here's the right answer, and here's how you, through some logic, arrived at the wrong answer. It can be more persuasive, and it can also teach them how to think better. The other wonderful thing that Adam does on Adam's Ruins Everything is he makes it okay to be wrong and be imperfect. He makes it okay to be wrong and perfect. He had an entire episode recently devoted to Emily, his co-host, ruins everything, where Emily went up and convinced him, told him about all the mistakes he'd made over the first 2 seasons. And it was actually wonderful, because one of the mistakes that he made, she got to use my own research to both metaphorically and literally beat him in a boxing match. So here's Adam cowering from my research. And so what's really great about this kind of way of thinking is this is not, if we're thinking about how to make things better, one of the places that all of us can make better in thinking about is education. And education is a place where we have done a lot of things potentially wrong that has engendered this atmosphere. We've taken complicated problems and said there's a right or wrong answer. We've given you points if you get it right that point, and there is no chance for you to make it up, right? If you either get, the answer is C on the test, and if you get it then, it's right. And if you get it wrong, you're wrong, and I've marked it down, and you're never getting an A in this class because there's no time to make up those great points, right? We've set up a system where being wrong is a really, really negative thing to be. And we need to get people to play more in a space where they can talk about being wrong, right? The only way that you can talk through any problem, whether it's a personal bias, a group bias, is that the person you're talking with feels comfortable and you feel comfortable in you saying things wrong. So there's this, to end with, we have this sentence that we like to use all the time, and I'm not a huge fan of the sentence. And that sentence is we should question everything. And A, that is an intractable way to exist in reality. And B, it's really negative. Because really what that's saying is, if Spencer says something to me, I'm going to question him. It's really negative. If I'm wrong, I'm going to question me. It's a really negative connotation of the way we approach it. It's adversarial, as I think too much of our knowledge system and journal publication process also is. And so we don't need to tell people to question. We need to make the act of questioning more desirable, more acceptable. And in sort of a vague understanding of how that might be done is I like not using the word questioning ever. I like this phrase. I like the phrase, I wonder. I wonder. I wonder if I'm wrong, what I'm missing, how we can do better next time. If the scientist, if the speaker is missing anything, what other perspectives? And it's this feeling that you stay in this zone of continually exploring and building and collaborating. It's empowering, it's comfortable, it's desirable. And I think that's a way and a space that we can get to. And the way we get to that is potentially a lot in the way that we fashion education and potentially write in journalistic inquiries. Thank you guys very much.
When did politics turn into religion? What's your take on that? I feel like
So when did politics turn into religion? I think it's a very difficult question. And so I think lots of times right now, the famous term, identity politics. So here's a couple things. I think to some degree, the internet facilitates identity politics because what it does is it allows you to consistently show who you are. And that way, people can keep seeing you doing the things. So rather than you in private focusing on coming up with ways to find solutions, or in private finding ways to go out and advocate and go door to door to change people, the new way in which a lot of politics is happening, or at least in addition, is performative politics on social media. And that itself, I think, is one of the large factors that is leading to that, in addition to all like the micro niche networks feeding and rewarding those things like that. And let me answer that in a little bit more specific way in which the internet is problematic and how potentially we can fix it. So on the internet, two things happen. One is I post, and in part because I really think my Facebook friends are sometimes very intelligent and can give me responses, is I ask a really difficult question, like about, so recently there was that obscene gesture by the Astros player about making fun potentially of a Chinese or Japanese person, and that was kind of part of the problem. And then at that same time, I watched an episode of one of my favorite television shows that was really, really racist to French people. And The Good Place, which is a fantastic show in general. And I posted on my Facebook, here's a question, right? Can somebody give me an answer to this? I got about 3 likes and 3 comments. If I would have just posted on my Facebook that day, FDT, fuck Donald Trump, I would have got hundreds and hundreds of likes. And so what is rewarded is that way. And then the second thing is that what was the second thing I wanted to say? It's not rewarded in that. So yeah. And the other thing is people like me often don't post nuanced things because we're immediately judged. And if I were talking to somebody in person, they would be a different person. And I'll say this. I'll get in trouble because this will get into a narrative. But I have lots of friends in lots of schools around here, including some of the socially activisty gender departments and stuff. The things that they post on Facebook are far more intense and far less nuanced and seem more hateful to people who disagree with them than the things they say to me in person, because of performative stuff. And I don't post on Facebook because I'm worried that they'll judge me and potentially will hit me up on Facebook. But if we were talking to them in person, it would be different. So I think that those are contributing factors. Obviously, it's complicated and it's more messy than that. That was a long answer, sorry.
If you want to know more about that, I'd highlight some research that the Pew Research Center did a couple of years ago about how people talk about politics online, and found that people are increasingly reticent about communicating what they really think because of exactly as Troy described, the fear of being judged. You unfriend someone because they've said something you think is outrageous or ridiculous, rather than actually embracing that difference. Okay, other questions? Yeah.
Spencer, hearing to my new friend.
Is it about the color green?
No, probably maybe. I know you're talking about like Adam ruins everything. But what are some other places that you see as like good to whether it's like news or research or something like that you follow, or something that people should be reading up on, or kind of places that already do some of the things that you think are good?
Yeah, so the question is, where can you get your news, right?
Yes.
So here's two answers to that question. I'll answer that question, but I also think that sometimes, and in no way do I think that this is you, but I'm just using this as an example. I think lots of times us respond to this thing and we're very egoism. We focus on ourselves and we say, where can I get the news? How can I become enlightened? Rather than saying, how can I help other people be more enlightened? And so one of the best things that you can do is you can be a news source for other people sometimes. So that is individually talking to people who are different than you, whether that's on social media or in person. Now, where can you get news that's better? I mean, one of the things that I really like doing is just reading more straightforward scientific reports. So the more you can just read people who are presenting you the data, rather than a summary, like a two-sentence summary of the data, allows you to become more enlightened, because you can ask easier those I wonder questions. Like, I wonder if they controlled for this. I wonder what the sample size is. And so that's an answer. So following anything that is having a longer form that has more statistics and things. So for instance, the obvious answer is 538. Now, I don't think 538 always has the right conclusions about their data, but one thing I love about Nate Silver and his company is they often show you their data pretty darn clearly, so that you, as a person who understands logic and data, can learn from it, even if you disagree with them.
You said that the internet make confirmation bias worse, and I wonder if actually the internet make people somehow become more objective. Of course, it's double-edged sword in here. In the past, the CNN, whatever, other major media, actually, they monopolize the news sources. At least for the other half, less educated population. They have no other way to get the information. But now, regardless if there are some kind of a contradictory or maybe some kind of biased news sources, but the people have more opportunity to make comparisons. Would that be actually help?
So I 100% think that the internet has done a lot of great things. And so it has put out many, many different pieces of information that people would have never seen. Also the expanding of cable news, right? The amount of weird things that Vice News covers compared to any news source 10 or 15 years ago that was using video, the amount of podcasts and stuff is great. The problem, I think to some degree sometimes, is that still today, even though people can be exposed to that, they bubble themselves, right? And so a person just listens to Pod Save America, the liberal podcast, or they listen to the Rush Limbaugh podcast, and they get in places where, like Facebook's algorithm, it shares you not based upon the quality of the source, but whether your friends are sharing it or not. So I think it is very good, and I think we are being exposed to things, and sometimes when things go viral, it's really, really wonderful. The other problem about it, though, is that when things often go viral in modern times, they go viral immediately with commentary. So before you even understand what a Black Lives Matter protest has done, there's already commentary on it, and that can be problematic. But I definitely agree with you that we have been exposed to many things, and I think it is a really good thing, especially like if we think about gender fluidity or something like that, or sexual fluidity, that's really, really helped.
You mentioned in your talk kind of the role of education in like shielding people against wanting to be wrong. Are there any kind of like education-based solutions to that you would think would work?
Yeah. So one of the things, oh God, I'm gonna forget his name, but he's a chemistry professor in high school, I believe. And he has the idea whenever anybody's wrong, he says, think of it as a surprise. And so when anybody gets something wrong, they facilitate this idea, which is, oh, that must surprise you to have learned this new thing. And so just when anybody's wrong in class, it's okay. And finding a way to facilitate that. So one of the things that I actually have a real beef about with academia is classroom discussion. I think classroom discussion is usually run incorrectly for two reasons. The one obvious reason is it's just three people who talk, so it's not a discussion. And the second thing is people either are afraid to say anything that's wrong, or number two is even when they're wrong, the professor doesn't always correct them properly. They'll like take what they said, and I'm so guilty of this because I want my kids to like me. I'll take what they said and make it sound like it's right rather than sort of coming in on them and saying things. So as being a teacher here for a longer time, I've adopted, that's a surprise. And the other thing I say to my students always is, hey, I might not say to this other people, but you're an adult and you're a professional and you're awesome. This is why that's a little incorrect, and I think you can get it better next time. So something like that. I mean, that's very easy, but I'd love to talk about more extensive, systematic things as well. And one of those is death to the multiple choice test, at least in a large portion of it. And here's the thing, death to the multiple choice test, and the only way that happens is you fund the heck out of education. And you fund it smart, and I'm gonna say this, sorry if this gets out there. There are professors at this university who make $500 an hour if you calculate how much they make. They don't have a grader. And that is a misallocation of resources, and it's hurting the professors because they're taking time and grading rather than publishing and being the rock stars they could be, and it's hurting students because they aren't getting as much feedback as they get with more professional graders. Fund graders, fund TAs, do that, fund education, period. But also be, efficacious.